सते स्वयं लिप्यते हृदय कुहर मध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहम् इति सा आत्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा चिन्वता मज्जता चलनरो आत्मनिष्ठो देहं चडात्मकम् अहं बुद्धिर्न तस्यास्त्यतो नाहं तत्तभासुक्तिसमये सिद्धात्मसद्धा दृष्टा मनिष्ठा सो स्तुतितया अरुणा चलस्तिवः अरुणा चलस्तिवः With Bhagavan's immense grace, we have been meditating on the verses of Vivekachoodamani, the work by Adityankara. The translation by Bhagavan is what we are relying on. It is in prose form, but we find it has an impeccable adherence and fine sticking to the original intent of Bhagavad Father, and it is our good fortune that Bhagavan has translated this work. And as devotees of Bhagavan, disciples of Bhagavan, that makes it even more followable for us as an additional support to the practice of surrender and Vichara. We are in that segment where the Panchakoshas are being removed, just like the weed on the top of a lake's surface, says the Acharya. You have to literally peer inside yourself by piercing through these koshas. Annamaya kosha, Pranamaya kosha, we have seen through. Let's go back a little bit, retrace a little bit so that we start with the Manomaya kosha again. Probably we'll be targeting verse numbers 169 through 185 today, which deals with the Manomaya kosha. And we just saw a little bit about the power of the Manomaya kosha, that we belittle it or we take it for granted and create great danger for ourselves. How so? It is all of our experience that the Indriyas in the Annamaya kosha, powered by the Pranamaya kosha, they are struck in chronological time. They can only experience the time moving from past into present into future. Whereas the mind is not struck in that chronological time, nor is it struck in that tick-tock of the moments. It can make jumps from one part of the present to some part in the past, some position in the past, or suddenly anticipate something to happen somewhere in the future. It can put aside the time and space in chronology and make those jumps. And in that sense, cause the commitment of one's own life and sadhana to where it could have been avoided. That when the mind is inattentively used, we may end up spending many years or many iterations in areas where attention is best reversed and taken back to the source. That is what should be clear by the time we finish these verses, 169 to 185. We should realize that we should be very attentive to using this immense power that is there in us. If we carelessly use it, we will end up being used by that. We will become from the position of understanding and using this instrument, we will end up as the servants for the mind and its vasanas. Now let's go into the verses. Verse 169, where we start with the mental sheath, it is said to include the Jnanendriyas. You will find the Jnanendriyas also included in the intellectual sheath. That is, the listening, the seeing can be coupled with the qualities of the intellect also. But primarily, the Jnanendriyas derive their strength or knowledge from the Manomaya kosha. The data that is present in the Manomaya kosha primarily drives the Jnanendriyas. So Jnanendriyas are included here as well as in the Vijnanamaya kosha, which is to come next. It is very powerful and is endowed with all the thought forms, especially beginning with the I thought form And this is the basic instrument that is targeted by all religions, where it causes the primary bondage of I and mind. That in this existence, in this world, whether you take it as material, whether you take it as the thought structures, what does the mind do? It says this particular segment of the material, this particular segment of experience is me, is I. These which are allowed to be proximate to me, they are mine. And this is how the primary ignorance sets in. It divides existence as subject and object. And Bhagavan would remind us that in reality, the subject-object division itself is illusion. But that comes a little bit later. Now the Acharya opens up the imagery of the mind. Why does he open up this? That he says that the mind is like an ever-blazing fire. It has lit up the whole world, he says. And it is lit by the fire of the sense organs. The sense organs are given the imagery of the sacrificial priests who are conducting the homa, fed by the ghee of the sense objects as the fuel, the kept ablaze by the house, the fuel of the vasanas. Now, we had briefly seen this verse in the last segment, but then why does the Acharya open up from what we experience as mind? Why does he open it up like this? That the mind is seen as pervading the whole creation. Now, that is when the vichara becomes expanded and complete, and also the power of the mind is revealed to us. What do we mean by that? If you go into the verses of Ulladhu Narpadu, we will find that in verses 8 through 22, Bhagavan will be referring to the mind as basically the duality of jnana and ajnana, the three-part division as past, present, future, and the personality divisions as first person, second person, third person, the division as fate and free will. All these are there in the mind. What we will be thinking as the mind for us will be the instrument we use to earn money, to take care of our family, to take care of the responsibilities we have in society. Nothing wrong with that. That it does act as the instrument there. But why does the Acharya open up the enquiry like this? That the bondage that we face is not merely you can escape by understanding your own life. Unless you understand that all human beings are in the same travail as us, and find a common medicine. Find a common medicine for all human beings. Why so? Suppose we have the common disease of, let us say, cancer. Now, unless you find a common medicine that is applicable to everyone, you will not be able to come out of it. What is the common factor for that disease? You have to find out. What removes the causes for the disease? You have to find out and apply. Similarly, unless you find what is the cause for bondage, not only of Nandakumar, but of all of humanity, of all of living beings, of all of living and non-living beings, unless you understand this vistarana, this extent of the bondage, how can one liberate oneself? So, the mind which permeates the pranamaya kosha, it permeates the annamaya kosha, it permeates the whole world. The mind is a agni which has permeated the whole world. It permeates the living beings, it permeates the non-living beings, it permeates time, it permeates the space. That is how vast the mind is. So when the inquiry is done like this, then you will understand that we are not talking of this person who was born in 1962 or has an average life expectancy of so much. When we inquire and free ourselves from the mind, then we are freeing ourselves from this whole area of bondage faced as bhavaroga by the things and as existential problem faced by all beings. That is the problem created by the mind, and that is the problem that has to be addressed and got out of. That is the reason why the Acharya opens up the mind's scope, that it is not an instrument merely to carry out your individual tasks. The nature of bondage is far deeper, and your understanding has also got to be of the same nature. There is no ignorance apart from the mind. If it is the cause of the bondage of birth and death, the bhavaroga is caused by the mind. With the emergence of the mind, everything arises. With the subsidence of the mind, everything subsides. Bhagavan, of course, makes it a little bit more direct for us by saying that vrittayastvaham vrittimashiritaha vrittayo mano vidyaham manaha, that all the other vrittis in the mind, all the other thoughts in the mind are dependent on the I thought. So you can consider the I thought itself as the manas, and search for the source of that. You search for the source of the entire mind, which is permeating this whole world. So Bhagavan would say, Karuvam agandai undai anaitum undagum. Here the Acharya says, when the mind arises, everything arises. When the mind subsides, everything subsides. And manameva karana bandha moksha. For both bondage and for liberation, this mind is the cause. And of course, Bhagavan takes us to the root of the mind by addressing the I am the body thought. The next verse 172, we come across that how the mind is powerful is known by its nature in the dream. One of the first interactions I had with Akka is about the dream state, that she shared her knowledge with me that to come to the Advitiya Bhavana that Bhagavan is showing us, that is, which is beyond the mind, the dream is the best thing to understand and cross the mind. That in the dream, what is the content of the dream? Everything in the dream is me. As soon as I wake up, I understand the time, the place, the enjoyers, the objects of enjoyment are all me. We have had this incident of a dream by one of our devotees, Raghavendraji, who himself was not very proficient in Sanskrit. And he had this dream one day. In that dream, there was Dilipji, who was a little bit proficient in Sanskrit. He was talking with a Sanskrit scholar. And that conversation is happening in his dream. And in that dream, Raghavendra himself participates and shares that. He says that I don't know Sanskrit or something like that. But we can get the drift of that. The Sanskrit, the speaking of Sanskrit, the scholar, Dilipji, as well as Raghavendra himself, and the time and place in which this whole dream is taking place is all Raghavendra's chit only. And that is the experience that the Acharya wants us to recall. And now extend it to the waking state, he says, that in the dream state in which there are no objects, the mind creates its own dream world of enjoyers and objects, enjoyers and others, by its own powers. Similarly, all that it perceives in the waking state is also its own display. In one sentence, the Acharya extends the scope to treat this whole waking state as also a projection, is also a dream for the mind. When Kapali Shastri asks about Atma Ucharam, Bhagavan says that Atma Ucharam should be continued till the Ishvara Kalpana itself is transcended. The Ishvara Kalpana, of course, is the waking state where he is the Virat. He is the one who permeates the whole waking state as the self. And we should get beyond that, that all that is there in the waking state is actually the creation of one mind. That means what? That means just as we permeate our dream, the Ishvara self, there is only one self that permeates this whole waking state. And Bhagavan gives us a clue as to how to hold that Virat, how to hold that Ishvara. He says, when he came to Arunachala and he saw, he does the sensory act of seeing Arunachala, Bhagavan says, his mind immediately inquired, who is seeing Arunachala? Kandavan Yavan. Immediately, the seer vanished. Obviously, once the seer vanished, the scene also vanished. Nitrad Kanden, that which is the self of both Arunachala and himself. Both Arunachala and himself, there is only one self-attentive self. He was abiding as that. That Nindradu Kanden. In that self-attentive self, there is no other. If there is another, then you become seer or you become knower. You have once again moved into the relative plane. But to hold the Virat, to hold Arunachala in the waking state, all we have to understand is the world in front of us is Arunachala. Ashtamurti Brud Devo Pujanu. And who is seeing Arunachala? When we ask, the answer will come, I am seeing. Who am I? With effort, we are going to Parabhakti. Bhava Shunya Sadbhava Sustitihi Bhavana Bala Bhakti Ruttama, says Bhagavan, that we can get this experience of this whole waking state being a dream, being permeated by one self, one spirit. How to experience that? Who is seeing? Who is hearing when we hold that? But our experience is sporadic. Immediately some other vasana will come and disturb. In the Sahaja Sthiti, though the eyes are open, the ears are open, the body is working, says Bhagavan, the I was going on like a fundamental Shruti node. Bhagavan was always identifying himself with the Ishvara of the waking state. He was not only all his actions were the Ishvara's actions, his very being was naturally as Sahajasthiti identified for our understanding with the Virat of the waking state, the being of the Ishvara there, the one mind that is underlying all these objects of the waking state. That is what the Acharya is saying, that this whole creation in the waking state is a display of one mind. It is the experience of all that nothing appears when the mind subsides in deep sleep. Therefore, the bondage of samsara is only superimposed on the mind by the mind. Actually, there is no bondage in reality. That means from Virat, Bhagavan goes to, the Acharya takes us to that the inquiry in the mind will make us realize that there is nothing like this bondage. What is the experience we have to relate to? We have to relate to the deep sleep where there is no mind. The the waking state Sahajasthiti of experiencing the Virat is absorbed, is consumed by the Ishvara Sthiti of the deep sleep. Let's go back to Atmavicharam and Mandukya Upanishad. We are seeing that in the waking state, when we hold that for whom is this seeing, we come to the I, that is underlying the waking state. Bhagavan doesn't stop there. He says the drikka, the underlying I that permeates the waking state will be subtle, will be of the nature of thought. It obviously cannot be the nature of senses which are trapped in chronological time. It is the I which is subtler, which can underlie the sensory world. But then can one stop there? No. Bhagavan says that in that subtle I, the rest of the thoughts may arise. So in the day by day with Bhagavan, Bhagavan shares with the author that how the self-enquiry is to be made inside you, within you. See from where the I thought arises. That is, inside you, see from where the I thought arises. This is where Bhagavan shifts from making us hold the Virat of the waking state to make us hold the Hiranyagarbha of the dream state. That he says, the Ishvara is already present in you as the Hiranyagarbha I. Hiranyagarbha I means inside you. See from where the I thought arises. That implies that all the thoughts in creation, including the thought of the gross world as well as the outer, they are all within the I thought. And when you inquire for whom is this thought, from where does the I thought arise in me, all the other thoughts of the dream, they all, as Raghavendra realized that all those contents were him, in our inquiry we will realize that all this content of various thoughts is only the I. That is where the deep sleep becomes conscious for us, that we are able to see the Chidakasha. The Chidakasha inside us. The Chittakasha is visible to the eye because only the expanse of the eye is there. But that is the Hiranyagarbha. The Hiranyagarbha is, the Chittakasha is not seen outside like this. The Chidakasha is seen inside. And that is where the deep sleep is experienced. In the deep sleep, there is no mind, says Bhagavan and Acharya in this verse. That is directly experienced in self-enquiry. And many of the sadhakas would have come across that point that I am seeing a blank, but I don't know how to proceed. And Bhagavan will come to their aid and say, even while facing the blank, you are still there. So continue the enquiry. Go to Turiya, beyond the deep sleep, where the I is independent of the waking, dream and deep sleep. That will be the enquiry he takes us to. But here it is suffice to know that in deep sleep there is no mind. So the construct in the dream as well as in the waking state is only an illusion created by the illusory mind. Why do we call illusory? Something present at some time and absent at some other time is not real. So the mind is present in the waking and dream, but is absent in the deep sleep. Therefore, whatever we see as bondage in the waking state, it is really not there in the self. One of the interesting things that developed during the course of our self-enquiry practice is that it appears as though we have 16 hours of waking and 8 hours of deep sleep. In that 8 hours, some part of it we spend in dreaming. But Bhagavan says, all these three states are to the ego. All these three states are appearing to an I. And the gateway to cross these three states is here and now. Is in the present moment, is in the here. And How is that possible? That all these 16 hours, 8 hours, they are also thought. They are thoughts of time. And that I will be sleeping sometime later is a thought right now. And what does sleep represent? Sleep represents not knowing the self. And not knowing the self is present right now. So right now, the waking state, the indriyas struck in chronological time, that is there. The mind, the dreamer, is there in the present moment. The not knowing the self, the deep sleep, is present in the present moment. Therefore, we understand the waking state and the dream are illusions arising from not knowing the self. So, who am I takes us to the ever-existent deep sleep. Deep sleep underlies waking and dream, says Bhagavan. Only in a deep sleep, this so-called dream as well as the gross dream, they can appear. Gross waking state as well as the dream state are permeated by self-ignorance, and that has to be crossed by crossing the mind in the present moment. That is where we realize this verse saying, verse number 173 saying that the bondage of the waking state has no reality in the self. Just as wind gathers the cloud in the sky and disperses them, so the mind causes the bondage and also causes liberation. There are 2-3 verses here where how the bondage is caused and how the liberation is caused by the mind itself is discussed by the Acharya. The bondage is caused through attachment. Through attachment to the objects, he says it is like a beast being tied by a rope, that we tie ourselves to the objects. Jadamudal nanennad. The body doesn't say I. We rise and identify with the body. The object in the world doesn't say, come and possess me. But we say that we will be something if we possess that object. Therefore, through Rajas and Tamas, the mind, through the ties of attachment, it ties itself to the world. And how does it release itself? Through Sattva. Sattva is pure existence, where characterized by absolute detachment. Pure existence characterized by detachment. It frees itself from Rajas and Tamas. And that is the dispersing of the clouds. The clouds being the attachments to the sensory objects. That has been described by the Acharya in 2-3 verses here. Verses 174, 175, 176, 177. He says that the mind has the capacity to ignorantly get attached to the objects, to say that I will be worthy only if I have so much money in my bank account. Somebody would have lost $20 billion or 20 billion rupees in the matter of 2-3 decisions over a year or two. But if you go and ask his brother who is having $40 billion that you are susceptible to the same problem, he will not agree. That fellow made some errors, that fellow made some wrong decisions, therefore he lost. Do you think I am capable of making those decisions? Somebody would have lost just 5 crores in the stock market and will be availing a gold loan, and you will be going and talking to them. But the very next moment, you will be talking how safe you are with what balances you have in the bank. That is the power of illusion. That is the power of attachment that we have, which goes uninquired. That right in front of us, Bhagavan or life is showing that these are not reliable. That don't get attached to this. If it is there, it is all right. But attachment is going to bring pain. When they are separated from you, when that position comes where they were not there, you are going to experience pain. But though these things happen right in front of us as open secret, we won't have the vichara going about the ephemerality of things. That is the illusion and being tied to the illusion. But that mind which is sattvic, which listens to the Guru, And as Bhagavan says in the talks, which is continuously inquiring into the unreliable nature of the outside objects, the ephemerality of the outside objects. Such a mind alone will have the ability to look at the eye, he says. Bhagavan says, the eye of such a mind will be available for inspection. The funny thing that happened in my own journey, if I can share that with you, is that in 1997, I had the book from RMCL received through my daughter, where the Who Am I inquiry was there. But my own eye was so preoccupied with the objective goals that I did not make head or tail of what that self-enquiry was for. 6 years down the road, after by Guru's grace, I had practiced some meditation and practiced the art of letting go of thoughts. When Who Am I came back to me, that is when the eye was pure and available for inspection and taking to the source. But that is how the mind is, that if it is attached, if it is impure, we will not even understand what Bhagavan is saying. And when it is pure, it will be crystal clear how direct Bhagavan's teachings are and how it is easy to cross the great tiger called the mind. That is the next verse. The power of the mind. It is called like a great tiger is roaming wild in the huge jungle of sense objects. It is as though you have opened up a wild tiger among the sense objects. Therefore, we should be very wary of that. We should understand that we are committing a whole lot of time, whole lot of our sadhana when we commit to a single thought. When somebody asks me what you are going to do at the end of so and so period, immediately when I say that the next 10 years, this is what is lined up, it will be just one thought for me now. And both the questioner as well as the answer person, we won't realize that unknowingly we have trapped ourselves for 10 more years or 15 more years, as though we know what's going to happen the next moment. But that is how illusory and trapping in nature the mind is. That's why the Acharya says it's like a great tiger roaming wild in the huge jungle of sense objects. Be wary, be aware that when we commit ourselves through thought, we should understand what will be the duration. One of my friends and students had a past student, is a friend now. We were discussing of something called as a vagabond trip that was being organized by his friends. He was in a dilemma whether to go for that trip. And we just took the talks and saw, and Bhagavan said, it came that misery is only unwanted thought, where you don't have the strength to put aside that. And he really had trouble in putting aside that thought. Later on, we realized that vagabond trip is not only for the 5 days. Suppose you have some interest, develop some interest in it, it may mean that every week you may go for the vagabond trip. Or that your philosophy to life itself may be governed by that one thought called vagabond trip. What they would do in vagabond trip is just go somewhere, that evening stay there. In the morning, whatever thought comes to as their next trip, next place, they will go there and spend the time there. That is the vagabond trip. So he was having some doubt to commit himself to that or not. He had some reasons for that. But then to put aside that one thought where we would be committing, let's say, weeks or days, as well as probably a lifetime in the very principles in which we are going to live it, we have to be careful. That is why the mind is called as a great tiger wandering wild in the jungle of sense objects. It is only the mind that conjures up before the jiva, the subtle and gross objects, and the variations of the body, caste, station in life, qualities and action, causes and effects. These are all the tools with which the bondage is strengthened. Uninquiringly, we will be From morning till evening, we'll be identifying with all this. All our conversations will happen unobserved. From morning till evening, we'll be talking of various stratas of power which are not there. We'll say that person earned so much, that property has been registered at this value. All the underlying principle being that they are all the securities for our individual jiva, and the whole day will be spent in that way. Whereas we should understand it is the mind that creates all this, and only in observation you will understand you have already tied yourself to a particular group. You have restricted yourself, your thought to that group, and from that identification, from that bondage only you think further. Already you start thinking about other groups as good, as not good, and all that, because primarily you have identified with that particular group. Whereas inquiry will free you of that. The sattva guna, the non-hurried nature of thinking, the slowness in thinking, the slowness in committing to thought, that will free you from the rut into which the mind can push you. So doing, by attaching all this, it tempts and dilutes the jiva, which is really unattached pure intelligence, binding it with the qualities of the body, senses, life, and deluding it with the idea of I and mind in the fruits of action that it creates. It is the mind that binds us. It is the mind, when unobserved, that ties us up like a beast is tied to a post through its attachments, through its various thought processes, unaware, the let in unconsciously. It is the mind that binds us. In Atma-Vicharam, the advantage is that you can see this happening live. When the thought arises itself, Bhagavan says, you ask, don't try to complete it, ask for whom is this thought. If you apply this Brahmastram carefully, you will learn about how that one thought could have multiplied into many. And only when you let go of the other thought and have the habit of the practice of holding the eye, you will learn about the power of thought. You will say that sometime we will feel bad that we are not in some other place. We could have been there. We could have been of support to somebody. The thought will be there. One of our devotees' father passed away recently, separated from the father's place by thousands of miles in another country. So naturally, there will be this thought that I am here and father is there. Bhagavan says this feeling that I am not in that place arises because you are bound to I am the body and I am here. I am in Bangalore, I am in this place arises because the I am this body thought arises. If you ask Namandri, Nalede, Nadede, says Bhagavan, that the time and place itself binds you because you have bound yourself to the body. When we identify with the body, we are bound in time and place. When we de-identify with the body, when we inquire like that, the self-attentive eye is the same across time. The self-attentive eye is same across places. Therefore, the self-attentive eye is real. The experience of places and times is not real. You are really not bound by the place where you are. You are really not bound by the time in which you find yourself, says Bhagavan in Ulladhanarpade. But that comes only with investigation of the identification jumped into by the mind. The mind immediately jumps at a tremendous speed. Now, in quantum entanglements, they are realizing that the speed with which the entanglements is happening between two particles, they are not able to even understand at what levels of speed it's happening. It is 10 power 30 times fraction of 1 second. In that time, the entanglement in the mind or the entanglement between two particles is happening. Entanglement is the attachment, is the relationship we have allowed unobserved. And at that level itself, the freedom comes when you start observing your I thought. That the casual attachment to other thoughts, it gets dropped when you start observing the I thought. By the means of this false representation, the mind creates the myth of samsara, bondage, for the jiva. This is the primary cause of the sorrow of birth and death, which binds those who are subject to the faults of rajas and tamas and lack discrimination. Those who lack discrimination and are very quick to thinking, they feel bound by samsara. So what is it we have to cultivate? We have to cultivate the practice of atma-vichara and vairagya. The vairagya and abhyasa are the two practices to be adopted by us according to Acharya here, that we should have desirelessness and sadhana, is what he is saying. Just as the cloud masses revolve through the air, so does the whole world revolve through the delusion of the mind. The whole world is run around in all its bondages, in all its connections, by the mind only. Therefore, those who know reality declare that the mind is the ignorance. The mind is the root cause of ignorance. Those who seek liberation must examine the mind with this mind. The manasa, mana alokya, is the way out of the bondage of the mind. What is the root limitation of the mind that the rishis have found out? The mind becomes strong and expands when it is given the other thing. Only in the presence of other thoughts, the mind grows rapidly. When you remove it, asparsha yoga, when it remove it of the contact with other thoughts, then the mind starts vanishing. The mind starts losing its hold. Don't allow it to be in touch with the other, says Bhagavan. The moment you ask, manasam tu kim margane krite, naiva manasam, the mind itself, just that is, it can't stand the scrutiny of what it is. That is why Bhagavan gives us self-enquiry. This out of desire for liberation, out of desire for this truth of the self, and out of the desire to come out of this danger of being caught in this tiger called the mind, with that one single desire, we should come out of all other desires, says the Acharya. All other desires are illusory in the sense that they will take you somewhere, then the goalpost will be shifted. You will reach another time and place where a new goalpost will be given, and we will have to run again. Whereas one should understand the nature of the bondage of birth and death created by the mind and have the singular purpose of applying the Brahmastram of Atma-Vichara. With the Brahmastram of Atma-Vichara, I should put aside the other thought. Then that Manasam tu kim margane krite is practiced, and ninth Manasam becomes the reality, which is what the last verse, the 185th verse says, that the mind too appears and disappears. It is the seen, it can be seen, whereas the self doesn't appear or disappear and is never be seen. Therefore, the mind too cannot be the self that we are seeking. In Vivekachoodamani, the self we are seeking, can it be of the nature of the mind where the other thoughts arise? It can't be, because the mind is seen, the self is not seen. The mind appears and disappears. The self does not appear or disappear. Therefore, one has to cross this limitation, this root of all bondage, this root of ignorance. There is no ignorance other than the mind. There is no bondage of birth and death other than the mind. It is the mind that has to be crossed. Manasam tu kim margane krite naiva manasam marga arjava. Vrittayastvaham vrittimashritaha vrittayo mano vidyaham manaha. Ahamayam kuto bhavati chinvatah. Aipatatyaham nija vicharanam. Ahaminashabaj. Mano nasham. After that, ahaminashabaj. Aham daya. Spurati hrid swayam. Parama purna sat, says Bhagavan. When the mano nasha is complete, there one realizes that one has ever been the self of all. The so-called bondage, the mind, it does not have any reality. There is no thought that only for satsang we just say, I did not understand the I at some time and then I understood the I. There are no such thoughts that are allowed in self-abidance. That I was like this, then I became like that. No such thought is there in the self. Your path that you have apparently traveled, that vanishes as illusory. That you were a bound being sometime, and some other time you got into realization and came to the freedom of the self. All these stories are vanquished and they all vanish into illusory non-existence. The only reality is the I. The self alone is. I was never bound. I never got any book. It is not that I traversed at a time when there was impurity and then gained purity and then came to the self. All those thoughts are for whom? Are for me. Who am I? The whole story of the pilgrim's progress or the path of the jiva is all illusory. The self alone is. Bondage is not real. The seeking for liberation is not real. The self alone is real. Is the anubhavam that is. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. Let us self-enquiry for the 6 more minutes that we have till 8 o'clock. Then we can wait for a custom. You can set the time for us.
Yes, uncle, I'll set the time.
Namo Ramana.
Namo Ramana. Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana. Shining as the self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self manifest as Ramana, we in this satsang are meditating on Bhagavan Ramana's translation of the Vivekachoodamani, the crest jewel of discrimination, a composition of Adi Shankara Bhagavad Pada. And true to that word, true to that definition and title, today we have been taken to the Chudamani of discrimination. We have Nandakumar ji concluded today's sharing with the absolute ajata, that there is no duality whatsoever. I remembered one of Swami Brahmanandaji's talks, very in a light-hearted manner. He was conveying this most serious truth. And he was saying, the Vedas and the Upanishads have never accepted that we are the body. The Upanishads have never accepted that we are the mind. Where does the problem lie? Swamiji, I am having a lot of problems. You come and tell me. But when the one for whom the problem is there is non-existent, how can there be a problem? There is no duality. So Bhagavan also says in Ulladinarpadu that to think that non-duality results at the end of sadhana is a misnomer. It is not the case, because he says, Sadhagattil eduvidam sadhyatil attuvidam oduhindravadamadum unmayala. So it is not true, he says. To say, oh, right now I am experiencing duality, later I will get into the non-dual experience. And he gives the beautiful example of the 10 fools who crossed a river and thought that they had to count themselves to make sure all the 10 had crossed. And in the process, each one of them ended up counting only 9, because each one of them left himself out. And finally, a kind wayfarer had to allay their distress by counting them, asking them to put out their hands and counting 1 to 10. Then Bhagavan says, even tan tedum kalum tanai adainda kalattum tan dasaman andriyatan. So even when you are searching for the I, when we are searching for the self, when we are trying to cross over the boundaries of the I am the body and the senses and the prana and the mind, all this which seems to be reiterating the fact that we are identified, we are limited beings, all that when we are trying to cross in our search of who am I, even then the truth remains the truth, says Bhagavan. There is no division, there is no boundary. But at that time, like we saw even in today's exposition, the Virat, the Hiranyagarbha, there seems to be a world which is impinging on our consciousness. But what does the Acharya say? What does Bhagavan say? That everything is only in the mind. So if I feel that the senses are feeding my extroversion, that is not actually true, because the senses are also only within the mind. It is only if I pay attention to any sense object that it can become a reality for me, says Bhagavan. It is the same way with any physical object. It is the same way with any mental object. It is only if we give attention to it that it comes alive for us. Now, we may have various reasons why we are not able to get into that completely sattvic mode and remain in that mode at all times. But the fact is that that alone is the truth of our own nature. So whenever we are searching, and that is why Bhagavan gives us this beautiful tool of who am I, the enquiry, because otherwise we will make everything into a thought. Our sadhana is a thought. Our need to turn inward is also a thought. But these thoughts are needed. They are called pratipaksha bhavana. They are needed to counter the habit of extroversion until we are able to naturally abide in the self. But no matter what the need to practice, the beauty of the need to practice, no matter the wonder of self-knowledge, the self-realization, the awakening, all that may fire us a lot. And that yearning, that fire in us to get back to the self is very important for us to turn back with that fervor in self-enquiry and abide in the self. At the same time, we must remember that nothing is equal to abidance. Not the best of thoughts is equal to abidance. Not the best of actions is equal to abidance. Everything is good. Bhagavan has accepted all forms of sadhanas as aids to self-enquiry. In Ashtakam also he says, Unai arivuruttidarkendre irundane vidantoru irundane madantoru vida vida uruvai. Irundane madantoru vida vida uruvai. Vida vida uruvai. For each one of us, our practice is very unique. Although we share in the satsang, the common path of self-enquiry, the way each one of us experiences it within would be unique, would be our own relationship with the path, our own relationship with Sadguru Ramana. But we must remember that there is no equal to self-abidance. So, since self-enquiry directly takes us to the abidance, that's why Bhagavan recommends the self-enquiry as the direct path. That's why we hold on to self-enquiry. And whatever else we use as aids in our sadhana, we must remember that they are aids, and the importance is not for the aid. The importance is not for the sadhana. Importance, the purpose is to abide in the self. Swami Virajananda gives a beautiful example. He says the pole vaulter carries a pole and then he uses it to cross heights which normally a human being cannot jump. So that stick which he takes with him, that pole, which is a flexible pole, pliable pole, that pole supports him until he jumps over. But Swami would say, if the pole vaulter decided, oh, this pole is helping me so much, I must carry this pole when I jump across, He will not take the pole, he will not also jump across. So Nandakumarji concluded by saying nothing, none of these is there in self-abidance. We are sharing this in the satsang in order to understand, in order to reiterate to ourselves that nothing else matters other than steady abidance in the self. Nothing else matters. Everything seems to be important at that time. And there is some force which pushes us into action. There is some force which pushes forth thoughts. But Bhagavan Ramana says we have the complete freedom not to identify with those actions, not to identify with those thoughts and experiences, but to turn back through the inquiry until the point of abidance. Then abidance takes over. Then again, when abidance is weak, then again inquiry has to be pursued. And this will surely happen for every one of us, because that is the purpose for which he has brought us to his feet. Nonetheless, Sadhuam Swami says, Yedai Katru Tara Guru Uru Yedithu Vandanayo Adai Katru Kodungalappa. And he is Bhagavan as the inner Guru. He is drawing us ever within. But as the outer Guru, as Bhagavan says, he is allowing us this beautiful satsang, this beautiful manana as a support for the inquiry to get back to steady self-abidance. May this year, 2026, be one of more strength and firmness and love, strength and firmness in the practice of self-inquiry, in holding on to the self, and love for the self. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana.
Namo Ramana. Thank you so much.